right. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Tania Irwin, who is the Director of Student Leadership Development here at Temple University. Tania, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I look forward to our
Absolutely.
conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Hey, y'all.
And to begin our conversation, I would love to hear a little bit about you, the work that you do here at Temple, and if you can tell us a bit about your story and how you became the Director of Leadership, Student Leadership Development at Temple. Tell us a bit about how you arrived at your current position.
Absolutely. So I always tell people, and no one take offense to this, but I always like to say that I have the best job on campus, right? And I know everyone feels that way, but I really had the best job on campus. And that's just because I get to essentially play like a very much an up close and in-person role in student self-discovery journey. I think when people hear leadership, it's such a buzzword that everyone has their own definition of it. But in our office, and it says for OLD, you'll always see, I'm actually wearing our sweatshirt and a logo. You'll see an owl and an egg as our logo, just because when we talk about leadership, for us, leadership is a process, not a position, right? And so this idea of really leadership, when you get down to the root of it, it's about influence, how you use who you are and what you got to influence and impact someone else, which can either be good or bad, right? But really this idea of we're always evolving, like this process is always happening. So this idea of you're always in an egg. Once you grow in an area, then you're back in egg form and you're starting all over again. And I get to be a part of that journey with students here at Temple, which I love. And a lot of it came from, of course, being a student leader myself. I think for the most part, a lot of folks who are in student affairs are in student affairs because they had a great student leadership experience. So fun fact, I had the opposite. I didn't have the best leadership experience, which is, I think, why I'm so passionate about leadership now. I think on one hand, so first I started my career and my undergraduate career at an HBCU. So I'm a proud NCCU in North Carolina. I'm proud alum. And so, of course, if you know anything about HBCUs, they are low funded institutions. And so whereas like for a school like Temple, which is an R1, you have your entry level, your mid-level, and like your senior level positions within departments. At an HBCU, because of funding, positions are limited. So when you look at a department, a large department there is like 8 people. And so I got my start in like orientation and student affairs, which, as you can imagine, one person in all of those offices. And so as a student leader in those offices, I was getting hands-on experience at a very young age. And so I didn't even realize it, but I was doing entry-level work at 19 years old. and so for some people that might be very overwhelming, but the great thing about that is that I got to learn a lot. Although through mistakes and through people yelling at me a lot of the times, I got to learn a lot at a young age. And then also being very unique and very different. And you also know, if you're familiar with the office, is that we have our motto is lead authentically, this idea of really living in your fullness, which you will find that people will verbalize places, but we talk about inclusive culture, that is not always the case. I'm actually working on a curriculum and a presentation I'm gonna make available for speaking next year called a culture fix, not a culture fit, right? Which is this idea.
Love the idea.
Thank you. Yeah. It's in that a lot of it is inspired by my own personal experiences within leadership of having people who, because I was very different from them, didn't understand how to lead me. And they didn't realize some of the things that they did and how they had a negative effect on my self-esteem, on how I perceive my work, and my value within an organization. Simply because I was different. Like I dealt with, I'm very outspoken. I have concerns about terms like professionalism, because they were coined by an old white man in the 70s who wasn't thinking about me. when he created them, right? And so I had to navigate that, but I had to get that under people who didn't fully understand how to do that. And so a lot of what I do comes from that space of how do we teach people how to know themselves enough to whether they're secure in who they are and what value they bring, but also so that they can create environments and where other people can come in and be who they are and share their values as well.
Terrific. Thank you.
Very long response, but I hope I answered all the questions in that
You
one.
sure did. Yeah, we learned so much, I think, through your response about how you arrived at this experience. I think sometimes we can actually learn a lot about leadership, not only from exemplars, those who exhibit really effective leadership qualities, but also leadership experiences that are less favorable or unfavorable for us, right? We learn by observation, we learn through interaction. And that means both positive and negative interactions we can learn a lot from, and we can develop as leaders based on both those kinds of interactions. Well, they can have, in fact, in some ways, more negative interaction may have a more impactful impression on us.
It's like parenting, right? I think when we're parents, we take on both the good things that we love that our parents did. We want to reinforce those, and then like, oh, I'm not going to be as strict as my parent in this area. It's like you take the meat with the bones. I think with both your good and your bad experiences, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Terrific, a terrific analogy. And I think a lot about leadership development as nurturing talent, nurturing ability, right? And I think in a lot of ways that is a lot like parenting. That we nurture the qualities, the abilities that we see in other people. And I think that is certainly the role of somebody who's responsible for developing leadership.
Absolutely.
Let's talk more tangibly about some of the kinds of programs and initiatives that you implement. So how does the process of student leadership development take place at Temple?
Sure. Well, actually, so you brought up a great point in that it's almost like parenting. And so what folks we lose track of is that all college students are just grown-up teenagers, and we forget that many a times. We think that because they become first-year students, or in some cases we call them freshmen, we try to avoid saying freshmen, but first-year students, they're fresh out of high school, and many a times they're leaving their homes, and it's their first time out in the world. And so upon entry, they're making a lot of decisions for themselves, in some cases for the first time. And so what our office does, and we try our best we offer a bunch of things for students to engage in, and hoping that they find these moments and these spots, whether it be through a one-time program or a series or a long-term or a job or an internship. We try to find ways to be their parents, essentially, or provide that guidance, but through their collegiate experience. And so you might find like a lot of times students are going through things mentally, emotionally, within their student organizations, within their classes, and just navigating life. And they don't have their person, or they don't feel like they can call home and someone understands. And so a lot of times our office and those programs provide opportunities for students to do that. Right. And so we have an idea of a student-ran, student-driven office. And so fun fact, outside of myself, all of the other folks in our office, in our department, are all students. And so every program, so if you go to our website, every program, every initiative you see, we have a trainer model. So I have student workers and interns who I train, who then go out and train students.
And those, through that, I imagine they're developing leadership skills by having those. So it's this
yes,
it's sort of this meta component to this, right? Where it's leadership through hands-on leadership responsibility.
Yep, it's called experiential learning. So it's actually yes, and so it's actually a great segue because all of our programs provide that. It's this idea of how do you learn as you do. So to answer your question, even about how we design programs, I always tell people that there are 3 primary levels to how people develop, and that can apply to leadership or just kind of across the board. And that's a model of retain, apply, educate, right? Level 1 of education is really about how are you exposing them to new ideas, new concepts? So we have some programs that are very entry level. That level 1, we're just, hey, this is what leadership means. This is what critical thinking means and what it looks like, right? Then you have some programs that are level 2, which are like our leader shops, in that they're giving you a chance to apply what you've learned. So not only are you learning the concepts, but you're getting to apply them to real life scenarios, or you're getting to reflect on how they show up in your own life for students, which students tend to really, really enjoy. Then you have your experiential learning, which is that educate. That's how you show your highest level of learning. You don't know if you know how to do it until you can teach somebody else how to do it. And so for my students who they've been a part of it, they've hit those level 1 and level 2s constantly where they're ready to go to level 3. That's where you see the people behind the magic of what happens in our offices. And they're presenting at conferences, they're planning and running conferences, scavenger hunts, they're mentoring other students, they're leading workshops, etc. So yes, very much experiential learning, hands-on.
And to what extent might some of the students that you're engaged in working with also work with student organizations on the campus? There's a leadership component to leading student clubs and organizations. And I'm wondering the sort of the relationship between the leaders in formal student organization leadership roles and your office and the kind of work that you do.
Yes. And so that's actually a great point. And so, and I think you mentioned it earlier, and I want to come back to it, this idea of leadership being an exchange, right? Whether that be good or bad, is exchange, it's all about influence. And so one thing we try to be mindful of is that when we say student leadership, a lot of times that's only given, that title's only given to folks who are in student orgs. We might make it very clear that you are a student leader, even if you're not in an organization, because just because you're the president doesn't mean that you're in charge. And we see that not only in student leadership, but you see that in everyday life. Just because you have power in a position does not mean you're actually the leader of a particular entity or a group. And so we're really mindful of that language, both with students inside and outside. And so to your point, our entire framework in our department is authentic leadership, which is the idea about how do you learn yourself, how do you learn others, and find your fit within it. And so to answer your question, a lot of our programming that's geared toward non-student leaders is their self-discovery and them getting to know them. For students who are within the student organizations, we do training for them as well and our own programs for them, but we talk more so about how they show up within those teams. I have this saying like, you are the essential piece, right? And that each of us are almost like puzzle pieces. Mind you, you cannot use this analogy for current students because many of them I found have not done puzzles or have ever done a puzzle. So this is the last year you can use that example for anybody. After this year, they're not going to know what you're talking about because
you might have to switch to video games or something.
Yes, they're like puzzles. But I think everyone in your class would know what a puzzle is. And so just like with a puzzle, you find pieces that look very similar, right? They're similar in shape. They share the same colors, the same features. But when you try to fit it in a box, in this space, only one fits. And so just like that, we find that within every team, within every group, even in this world, each person adds unique value. There's something that you do in a way that just no one else can do it how you do it, even if they're doing it because you're doing it, right? And so this idea of we encourage them within their student orgs of despite your position, despite who's there, what value, what do you add to that group? And how do you leverage your strengths and your talents and your skills in that group?
Terrific. And I love the puzzle analogy where everything seems, at least at surface level, to have similarities, but only one specific way in which pieces fit together. Great analogy.
Absolutely.
Back to the idea also of formal and informal leadership roles. I'm curious, often with formal leadership, students will self-select, right? Mm-hmm. They themselves are driven or motivated to assume leadership roles. But I wonder, a particularly challenge on a large, diverse campus like Temple, how you can reach some of the students who are assuming leadership positions in more informal capacities. Is it about communication and helping raise awareness of the kinds of programs and support that your office provides? Or is it also establishing an organizational culture where individuals across the campus identify leadership potential within those who they engage?
Absolutely. So I'm going to hit on three things that you said. The first, I think, is important because even to how it's worded, I take the student off the front of leadership development because in reality, they're only students for the time that they're here. everything that we do in college is preparing them for life after. And so if we continue to put that student lens on everything, all they're learning how to do is to show up within Temple. And so a lot of our culture in our office is my job is to prepare you for life after this. And so in here, you're an adult and I treat you as such, right? So that's number one.
They have roles outside of being a student as well.
Absolutely. Right? They're already in the world.
Yeah, they may be interning. They have roles that also extend their lives, extend beyond just having a student role. I love that. Such an important point.
Absolutely. And so talking about org culture, I think that across the board, especially nowadays, and where competencies and skills and all this, like this career readiness is becoming a big thing across the board. We have to get out of the mindset of, yes, they're students, but they're adults. And it's our job to prepare them for the workforce and that. And so to your point, leadership programming, it's really unconditioning and unlearning this idea of, and reason I think behind self-selection, thinking about even in our own professional careers, many a times people are promoted not because of their ability to lead and influence, but because of their ability to perform a skill or to do a job. And so because of that, and mind you, our students have seen that and they've watched it not only on a national level we've seen, right, but like in everyday life. And so many times they believe that if I can do something, if I have a certain level of knowledge or a certain level of skill, it means that I am qualified for this role. And so how do we get them to unlearn that and focus more on, do you have the ability to lead, the ability to empower, to influence, and help other people use their values and use their skills, right? And so that's
in our class in higher education leadership, we discuss this, which is the idea that even leadership theory has extended beyond skill. Right? Skill theory in some ways is a very narrow and limited way of thinking about someone's potential for leadership, but it's behavior, it's practice, it's capability, it's personality, it's all the intangible qualities, not just someone's ability to perform in a given skill.
Absolutely. And so even to go back to one of your initial questions too, that's why I make it a habit of, while we do house our own programs, my first priority is always getting out and partnering with other people. So like I know, for example, even folks in this class, I've worked with them in different capacities to partner with their student leaders. I have a lot of academic faculty partners, and I'm having these conversations in classes all year long, in first year seminars, senior capstone classes. Students are always interning because of that. And that leadership is technically that it's embedded in everything that they're doing across campus. And so it's really a thing of, even though I am in a director or leadership role, it's a shared responsibility. Right. And so to that point, we do, because I know that students are learning the skills in the classroom and in their other internships, we focus primarily on, to your point, that behavior, attitude, ability, because that's what really is influenced about. I think people have to realize that as a leader, people take you home, right? Even in our jobs that we have now, even days that we don't want to, we take our leadership home with us. And so what you do, how you manage people, their work, what you deposit in them, negative and positive, it has an impact on how they see themselves, how they see their industry, their work, etc. And we have to take that a lot more seriously, not just in the skill capacity, but to your point, in that attitudes and behavior capacity.
I love that analogy as well, right? Leadership is something we take home. Education is like that as well, right? It's something that we cannot disentangle from ourselves. We could, let's say we have a highly specialized skill, right? Maybe it's computer programming. That may have certain applications in certain settings. Leadership has this ability to expand settings or span settings is the right word that I'm thinking of.
Absolutely.
It's not just something that has application in particular settings, but as long as we are engaging with other individuals, we are exhibiting our ability to lead.
I would even challenge that and say that first leadership is self-management, right? You can't lead other people until you learn how to lead you. That's why we always say, like, that's why I love the model that we use. I know, so you'll see social change everywhere for everyone's model when it comes to student leadership. I said nix that because of, number one, generationally, that's not where Gen Z is. Like, they care, but as much as a hashtag, and then they're on to the next thing, right? But also this idea of, until you understand you, you can never effectively lead anyone, right? Because like to that point, if you don't know who you are, you're easily threatened by anyone who comes in and shows talent, which means that you're going to mismanage their talents because you're coming from a place of insecurity, right? And so I always say leadership is number one, self-management, know who you are, then learn people so you know how to maneuver and leverage. Yeah.
Yeah, a really difficult challenge for some, right? To be able to be reflective and self-actualized, have self-awareness and develop that over time. I mentioned sort of leadership development being a reflective process also in thinking about the way in which we develop and the way in which we engage with other people in different situations and across different contexts. I wonder how you may help students develop a sense of self-awareness as they are thinking about their own leadership practice. How might they go about learning more about themselves, developing a sense of self-awareness?
Okay, so I'm gonna give y'all the real tea. And if y'all, I mean, y'all can use this, but just don't come from my job if I tell you. Tell you. I think the first thing to your point, and you mentioned it, is reflection. As common as it is, you'd be surprised how often people don't do it. I think especially in today when we're so busy, I think with technology and social media, we always have something going. We always have something playing. We're always doing. And so a lot of times our programs are just an hour out of a student's day, or so this is a post out of their on their timeline that just makes them pause and think about what happened. Even in our office, I use Schlossberg's theory of support and challenge, this idea of I'm not going to always be here to tie your shoe, because if every time you come to me and I tie your shoe, you never learn how to tie it yourself. And so the first time I might tie it for you, second time we're tying it together, third time you're on your own and I will coach you from the sidelines. Fourth time, you know better, go tie your shoe. Right. And so and some, while resistant, they do see the benefit of it. I love it because even like within our experiential learning programs, when students do service at the end of the year, they always say like, Tania, I didn't realize how much I learned in this year, because I'm really big on you can do this, right? So that's the first thing, reflection. A lot of times in those conversations, I'm just the mirror. I'm just the wall they bounce their ball off of, right? It's just like with therapy and with coaching. Many a times you have the answer, which is why that idea of self-management is so important. You know you the best. I can only tell you what I know about you from what I see, from based off of what I see, but you know you. And so a lot of times I'm like, okay, well, what do you see? Well, what do you hear? They'll ask me a question. What are my options? Well, what do you think your options are? Tania, who am I? Who do you think that you are?
Providing the necessary structure, I think oftentimes, right? It's that
Yes.
students and individuals in general may not know those kinds of guiding questions to even start the process.
Absolutely. And to your point, again, direction, right? And so I love, and I think also too, you mentioned my analogies. I use them a lot because a lot of what we do in the office, and I think why I'm so big on being informal, is that I try to remove all the fluff around what we teach about leadership. And I get to the point and I speak to people in a language they understand. Right. And so like to those analogies, I like we said, and I'm big on research. And I always say when it comes to working with students, you got to stay abreast of the trends, not to stay young, but to make sure that just because you know what you're talking about, the question is, do they know what you're talking about when you're talking to them? And so I am big on, I show up as myself. So when they hear me, we removed all the blockage and I'm talking to them like me. And I speak to them in a way they understand. So to your point, I might, for a student who's like, Tania, I don't know what I want to do after college. We use a GPS model, or like, Tania, I want this job. I don't know how to get it. Okay, so GPS. First, where do you want to go? All right. 2, where are you now? All right, what are the different routes that we can take to get there, and which one's going to be the most feasible for you? They get that because they know GPS.
They know GPS. Yes, that is a really great way for them to start thinking about, again, using those guiding questions with an analogy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a BYOB. It's be your own bestie. I try to teach students things that aren't just one time, but they can remember later. So like, mind you, some of these analogies I mentioned today, you will not forget them because now they're ingrained. Like BYOB, oh, be my own bestie. How can I be my own bestie in this moment? Yes.
And GPS, thinking about your present, where you want to go, and ultimately, I'm trying to remember that third dimension, but yes, where we are today, where we want to go, and the different ways to get there, the different pathways. That's tremendous.
And you choose the route based off what you need. Are you trying to get there the fastest? Are you trying to avoid certain consequences? Are you so I use that analogy. And if you understand GPS, you'll never forget.
Yeah. Are you trying to avoid the toll roads? Are you trying
There
to
you
go
There you
the
go.
fastest, the most direct? You want to avoid traffic. Exactly. I think it's a great analogy.
Awesome.
When you're guiding students through that process, I wonder the extent to which also it's important for someone in your role to keep a pulse on the career marketplace, because ultimately the skills that students are developing are important for life, whatever life may entail for that given individual. But I also wonder the extent to which there are employer competencies being sought after in those who graduate from post-secondary education. So someone in your role, I have to imagine you're not only keeping abreast of leadership, the latest leadership theories and models, but also what employers are demanding of students when they graduate, and how ultimately leadership comes into play in the way in which employers are seeking leadership qualities among those they hire. How do you go about that?
Absolutely. So the first thing, so I'm very, I think to get to your point, leadership is very fluid and it kind of expands across any industry. So when it comes to study and research, even though I teach incline, I try to avoid looking at industry specific things. I'll leave that to academic departments and other departments on campus. I do focus on workplace culture trends. And what they say. So the three things for people to know in regards to that, right? So the first thing is that while I do believe in NACE, I think sometimes NACE gives you too many. And I think depending on, to your point, depending on what happens the year prior, or depending on what's in the news, that 14, you first of all, no one can focus on all 14 effectively at once. And so I think that while all 14, I think in general are really, really important, focusing on three key ones. I think this past year, especially with the pandemic and even before that, with just the advancement of technology, the things that people are looking for are, for number one, critical thinking, problem solving, right? This idea of we're constantly looking at new, right? We're in this, every business, every industry is in new. We went from doing everything regularly to doing everything remotely, and now we're looking at hybrid for the first time. So everyone's in new, and they want to know, can you solve a problem by yourself without anybody else helping, right? Or can you think for yourself? So I'm really intentional in including that in my stuff. Number two, the job force, the job market, right? It's competitive. So for students coming out, their one disadvantage is that while they have a degree, they don't have experience. And so a lot of what I teach is authenticity for that reason. They have to students should know what value they bring and how they're different from other people. And we don't teach them that anywhere else because they're being taught the same things. They're completing their resume the same way they're seeing it. They don't know how, so when they get asked those questions about why should we hire you, they don't know what to say.
Yeah, I think actually our model of higher education is actually completely at odds with that notion, which is that in order for you to be successful or obtain employment successfully, you need to be able to speak like someone in that.
Yes, you have to have
you have to understand how to translate your experience into what employers are looking for. And while there's an importance of alignment, it's not about replication. It's not about losing authenticity in order to gain sort of the like manufacturing of a
absolutely. Right? Another analogy, if you already have 6 red shirts in your closet, when you go to the store, the first thing you're going to say no to is the red shirt. It's like, well, crap, I already have red shirts. I want the shirt. I want the item that I don't already have. It's an interview is you letting them know how you fill a void that they have. And so you won't know that if you don't know what unique value you bring. We call it like your USP, your unique selling point, or like your zone of genius. What can you do in a way that no one else can do it? And so we focus on that a lot. And number 3 is really teamwork, which again goes back to that idea of value and strengths. Many a times we're trying to be everything to everyone. It's like, no, if you come into a space, like, so for example, I am very assertive and I take charge a lot. But if I come into a space and there are already enough leaders in the room, I know how to go, you know what? They don't need me today because they already have enough. How do we train them how to show up as a team? Like, you have 5 skills, right? You have 5 tools in your suitcase. You don't need all 5 tools for this project or for this team. What does your team need you for, and how do you navigate that?
And someone who's able to navigate that successfully, is that emotional intelligence? Is that situational leadership? Is that self-awareness? Is that team dynamics? Maybe a combination of all of these.
Okay, so the first thing, I am the person who I'm going to always challenge a lot of these theories, because I think, especially nowadays in today's culture, like you said, they're different. The first thing I would argue about emotional intelligence, I think, is important, but also recognizing that what we consider emotional intelligence isn't always healthy, right? Many a times what we consider emotional intelligence is letting people treat us and talk to us however they want, and we say nothing. And that is not emotional intelligence. However, you can effectively let someone know, hey, when you did this thing, this is how it made me feel. This is how I interpreted your action. This is what I would like you to do moving forward. So we can have those critical conversations, right? I think that's why students have difficulty managing conflict, because we teach them that emotional intelligence is not saying anything, but they don't know that not saying anything is also being a part of the problem. Right. And so I think I would
reinforcing that that's acceptable, and right, and that it is having no impact on the individual, which is obviously not the case. Exactly. Yeah, there's a dimension that is sort of missing from traditional notions of emotional intelligence, and that's that responsiveness, I think, to to sort of the way in which what is perceived to be a negative interaction, how the individual responds to that, right?
Absolutely. So even to your question, I would say it's more about transactional leadership, because even to that point, there's no one size fits all. Like there's technically 16 observed leadership styles. And when you say which leadership style, it's all of them. It's whatever the person in front of me needs in that moment. Sometimes I'm being democratic and, okay, you know what? Hey, we all can choose. Sometimes it's no, this is what it is because I said so, and we don't have time for this. And they have to be okay with that. And I think, again, it goes back to really knowing who you are so that you can teach someone how to lead you, right? Because a part of a leadership, that's why I love people like you when you do a questionnaire coming into a role, because mind you, everyone doesn't want you for everything. So how do you know what your team needs from you is really important. But number 2, they have to know how to articulate that, set boundaries, communicate about those things, right? And even to your point, I think because, and why I think leadership development is so important. And so it's kind of sometimes disheartening how it can be. It's also, as we look at like as far as hierarchy across student campuses in higher ed culture, not just I'm not saying at Temple, just I think across the board, it's overlooked, but it's very important, because who else does that? Who else defines these words? We assume that they know what it means to be a critical thinker, what it means to define success, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be authentic. We leave those open to interpretation. And so they are playing life and living life based off what they think they know. And they're not watching the news, they're not reading books. So where are they getting it from? Right. Other people.
We're getting from other people, and right, in the way in which we speak about these things, or how others are defining these things.
Absolutely.
Becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy idea, right? Right. I'm wondering if we could touch on some of the challenges that higher education is currently experiencing and what that might mean for leadership. There are obviously no shortage of examples of the ways in which higher education as a field is challenged. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are as somebody who thinks daily about leadership. What does this mean for those who work within higher education institutions? But even more of interest to me is what this also means for student leaders and how they may be able to navigate these really challenging and uncertain times.
Absolutely. So it's a loaded question, but I love it. I think, so first thing, I think across the industry, as far as higher ed, I see both an area of opportunity, but also something that might be lingering on the horizon. I think to your point of, we saw on a national scale leadership. And we saw, I think, again, the idea of people are seeing now, it's not enough to put someone in a position because they have a power, because they have money, because they have the skill. I think people are realizing that it's also important that they have the mental and emotional capacity to manage their leadership. And so for people who are looking to land leadership roles, I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a criteria of how they manage people. I think number two, we're in a very culturally sensitive culture. And again, to that point, why I'm excited about this program about being a culture fit, and a culture fit is that diversity isn't just color of skin and religion and race. It's also personalities. I can't tell you how often as a young professional, people make very passive aggressive comments at me, or like, I'll never forget, like my hair changes. I intentionally change my hair color a lot. And people will say things like, oh, Tania, I didn't recognize you because your hair is different. And I'm like, did my face change from yesterday? But people do that all the time. And so we're in a very highly sensitive culture, and which not only is it sensitive, but people are actually taking like legal and serious action behind those. And so people being more mindful of that. So I can see those being questions that pop up as far as interviews and opportunities people are pursuing. Number one. I think two, it's a great opportunity for leadership development programs to expand, because to your point, because we have seen that people do not know how to lead. Now people want to know, well, then how do we lead effectively? And so this is a great time for leadership educators to come to the forefront of saying, this is what it looks like to lead effectively. And when you know people who do that, again, but I think also that point that comes with each institution, establishing what leadership means. Just to that point, and not to pick on Temple, but I think a lot of times, because of our physical separation as far as buildings and our campuses, I think to that point, our culture and language can get very cross-functional, and that every department you go in has a different definition of things like leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, Temple's a highly decentralized institution. In some ways, it's a organization comprised of many organizations.
Yes.
Hundreds, if not more than hundreds of separate organizations,
right,
with an overarching sort of mission that is designed to bind everyone together. But how that actually is manifest in the day-to-day isn't always consistent across the institution, largely because of its decentralization.
Right. And again, not just Temple, that's at most of your larger and R1 schools. And so to that point, you have to think that not only for people who have been now, not only with both students, but even people who've been working, we had a year of it. Feel like, you know, like having a bag over your head and not seeing. So you're doing and you're moving and you're walking and you haven't seen anything. So this bag is coming off our heads after a year, and people are going to be expecting direction. So if you're a supervisor, your teams are going to want answers and direction. Students are coming back to campus and they want to know, what the heck am I doing? Because we can't just give them a bunch of programs and go, okay, choose them, because they've missed out on a whole year and they feel like, oh my gosh, I missed a whole year of stuff. So their first inclination is to be like, let me do all of these. So even for myself, the first thing that I'm looking at as far as curriculum and programming at the top of the year is letting them know you didn't miss anything. Like, you can't miss what's for you is the biggest message. And so I'm trying my best to get them to be intentional about what they choose and why going into this new year.
I love that. One thing that I think is so important is we've placed a lot of emphasis on how challenging the transition was from campus-based learning to this remote world that we've been living in for well over a year. But we shouldn't underestimate the challenge of actually returning back to campus activity will be for faculty, staff, students. This transition back to what we would deem sort of our normal environment can pose equal challenge, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
Absolutely.
One final question for you, Tania, is more of a personal one, less a professional one, but I would love to know a leader who you have found personally inspiring.
Oh, easy. Well, again, yeah, we already talked about Michelle Obama, and if anyone's in this class who knows me personally knows I love me some Mish. I call her Mish because they're basically like family, but she hasn't known me yet. Keyword in that is yet. But outside of her, I would say Audre Lorde. For many reasons. I think primarily because she was someone, I mean, as an activist and an advocate, she was a scholar, all these different things, but she was really big on not being pigeonholed. And she's what I believe, when I think about authenticity, she embodies that. A lot of times in these, like to your point, all these leadership models were, and like when you hear authenticity, it's always a white man. And it's easy to be authentic when the world is designed around you. When we talk about authenticity, especially, I know it's, I think even to one of your points you mentioned earlier about for me in my office, how I lead, number one, I lead by example. I don't ask people to be their authentic selves, and I'm afraid to be my authentic self. So I show up as me with, it might be rainbow hair, it might be rainbow nails and a blue tongue because I had a popsicle at lunch, whatever, right? Whatever, however that is, I show up as myself. And she was someone who, despite being a part of the LGBTQIA community, despite being an African-American woman, she was unapologetically who she was, and she was able to inspire even after her time, right? She was able to inspire so many people like me to do what we do. And so shout out to her always.
Tremendous example. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Such a wonderful conversation. I learned so much from you, and I'm so delighted to have you join us for this virtual conversation.
Yes,
thank you once again. Thank you very much, and be well.
Thank you.